At 5 a.m. in New York on February 17, 2026, the sky holds a new moon at 28 degrees Aquarius. The Sun and Moon are sitting together at the very last degree of the sign, with Mars and Pluto also in Aquarius. Mercury and the North Node have already moved into Pisces. Saturn has just entered Aries at 0 degrees. This is a threshold sky, not dramatic, not explosive, but exact. Air is closing a chapter. Water is already in the room. Fire has just lit a match. You may not see it yet, but something has shifted from thinking about your life to preparing to move inside it. A new moon always marks a beginning, but when it happens at the final degree of a sign, it also carries a sense of completion. Something about how you've been thinking, planning or identifying yourself has reached its edge. Aquarius is the sign of future vision, collective roles, and the mental frameworks we use to define who we are within community. With Mars and Pluto there, that space has not been neutral. There has been intensity around belonging, contribution, direction. You may not have named it out loud, but internally there's been pressure. This new moon does not come with a bang. It feels more like a mental exhale, a subtle sense that a cycle of overthinking is winding down, a quiet awareness that certain narratives about who you should be are no longer holding. Because Mercury and the North Node are already in Pisces, the tone of the day is softening. Thought begins to blur into feeling. Certainty gives way to intuition. And with Saturn newly in Aries, there is also a subtle undercurrent of initiation, a sense that something new wants to begin, but without spectacle. This is the kind of sky that creates an inner shift before any outer evidence appears. The world may look the same, but internally, your posture is adjusting. This new moon is not about exposure. It is about alignment at the edge of an old mental chapter, and that edge, even if it's quiet, matters. When a new moon happens at the very last degree of Aquarius, the shift often begins in the body before it becomes a clear thought. Aquarius is an air sign. It lives in the mind. But when that mental cycle completes, the nervous system is usually the first to register it. You might wake up feeling slightly wired, but not in an anxious way, more like your system has been processing something overnight. A subtle buzz in your head, a sense of mental spaciousness that feels unfamiliar, or, on the other side, a heaviness in your forehead from thinking too much for too long. With Mars and Pluto still in Aquarius, there has been sustained pressure on your mental field. That can show up as jaw tension, clenching your teeth without realizing it, shallow breathing when you scroll through messages, shoulders creeping up toward your ears while you replay conversations. This new moon doesn't add more pressure. It reveals where the pressure has been living. Notice the micro signals. When you imagine continuing in a certain role, does your chest tighten? When you picture stepping back from something that drains you, do your shoulders drop a fraction? That fraction matters. Mercury in Pisces softens the edges of thought. Instead of sharp internal dialogue, you may feel sensations that are harder to label. A low hum of fatigue when you open your inbox. A wave of relief when you cancel a plan. A subtle warmth when you think about starting something quietly on your own. Because the North Node is also in Pisces, there is an invitation to trust these sensations, not as dramatic intuition, not as mystical downloads, but as embodied data. Saturn at 0 degrees Aries adds a different tone to the body. Aries is physical. It governs impulse and movement. Saturn asks for discipline, but at the very beginning of a cycle, it often feels like hesitation. You might feel the urge to initiate something and then immediately second-guess it. A step forward followed by a pause. Chiron in Aries can make this especially sensitive. The body remembers past moments when asserting yourself didn't go well. Maybe your heart rate increases slightly when you consider speaking up. Maybe your stomach knots when you think about doing something independently. Today is not about overriding those reactions. It's about observing them. There may also be small positive shifts. A steadier breath when you decide not to over-explain. A grounded feeling in your legs when you commit to one practical task instead of 10 mental plans. Fortune in Capricorn supports this grounding. Simple actions can stabilize the nervous system. As the day moves forward, the Piscean influence becomes more noticeable. You may feel more porous, slightly more sensitive to tone in conversations, more aware of the emotional climate in a room. If you're not careful, that can feel like overwhelm. But if you stay anchored, it can feel like clarity. Body awareness today is subtle. It's not about big emotional waves. It's about micro adjustments. The jaw unclenching, the breath deepening, the shoulders lowering half an inch. This is how a threshold feels. Not like an earthquake, like a quiet recalibration in your nervous system. And when the body begins to feel even slightly more aligned, that's often the first sign that a new cycle has already started. In daily life, this new moon doesn't announce itself as a grand event. It shows up in the small moments between tasks, in the pause before you reply, in the half-second hesitation before you agree to something. You might wake up and immediately check your phone, emails, notifications, group chats, and instead of reacting automatically, there's a flicker of distance. A question forms. Do I actually want to engage with this right now? Aquarius governs group dynamics and collective spaces. With Mars and Pluto there has likely been pressure around collaboration, performance, and visibility. At work, this might look like over-functioning in meetings, offering solutions before being asked, staying late because you don't want to disappoint anyone. Today, the new moon highlights that pattern without attacking you for it. It doesn't accuse. It simply turns the light on. You may notice how often you replay conversations from yesterday, how you mentally draft responses to something that hasn't even happened yet. That's Aquarius energy looping through the future. But Mercury in Pisces interrupts that loop. It asks you to feel instead of forecast. In practical terms, that could mean noticing how tired you feel halfway through your morning, or realizing that a project you've been planning feels heavy rather than exciting, or sensing that a friendship has shifted even if nothing explicit was said. Beginning gently without overexposure means you don't rush to explain your shift. You don't post about it. You don't make a dramatic announcement. You let the realization settle. In communication, this may look like shorter responses, clearer boundaries, choosing not to engage in subtle tension. Venus in Aries supports directness, but not aggression. You can say, "I need some time," instead of overcommitting. You can decline without a long justification. In decision-making, Saturn in Aries asks for one concrete step. Not a 5-year plan, not a rebrand of your entire life. One honest action. Maybe you finally submit the application you've been revising for months. Maybe you block off an hour on your calendar to work on something personal. Maybe you stop waiting for perfect conditions. Jupiter in Gemini adds a layer of curiosity. A casual conversation at lunch could spark a new idea. A podcast on your commute might reframe how you see a situation. The shift doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be cognitive. A new sentence replacing an old narrative. Even your pace may change. You might move a little slower between tasks, or you might feel a subtle surge of motivation to organize something tangible. Fortune in Capricorn favors practical grounding, cleaning your workspace, reviewing your budget, updating your to-do list in a way that feels realistic rather than aspirational. These are not glamorous actions, but they stabilize the transition. As the day unfolds, you may also notice what you no longer want to explain. That's significant. Aquarius often performs for the group. Pisces softens that need. Aries prepares you to act without applause. Daily life today becomes the testing ground for a quieter identity, not the one you broadcast, the one you practice privately. You don't have to reveal everything that's shifting inside you. You can begin without overexposure, and that beginning, even if it's invisible to others, changes how you move through the rest of the day. The core pattern of today is simple, but not always easy to see. You have been thinking about change for a while, but hesitating to act. Aquarius energy excels at vision. It maps the future. It analyzes systems. It imagines better structures. With the Sun, Moon, Mars and Pluto all in Aquarius, your mental field has been active. You've likely been evaluating where you fit, what needs to evolve, and how your life could look different. But evaluation is not initiation. You can understand everything and still never move. That gap between clarity and action is the real tension of today. This new moon at the final degree of Aquarius exposes that gap. The gap between knowing and beginning, between clarity and embodiment. Saturn entering Aries brings that gap into focus. Aries is about movement, impulse, the first step. Saturn demands responsibility. Together they create a tension. You can no longer live only in ideas. Something small, concrete and self-led wants to happen. The pattern isn't procrastination in the lazy sense. It's more subtle. It's the habit of waiting for perfect alignment, waiting for more certainty, waiting until you feel completely confident. Chiron in Aries reveals why. Acting independently may have been risky in the past. Speaking up may have led to criticism. Starting something new may have once exposed you to failure. So your system learned to stay in the realm of thought. Today, that protective pattern becomes visible. Overexposure is one extreme. Announcing every plan before it has roots. Sharing every intention before it's stable. Aquarius can lean there, especially when identity is tied to being seen as progressive, aware, or evolving. The other extreme is paralysis, endless strategizing, refining the idea without ever touching the ground. The new moon invites a third way. Beginning gently without overexposure means taking a step that does not require validation. It's opening the document and writing the first paragraph without telling anyone. It's setting up the savings transfer quietly. It's blocking time for therapy, training, or rest without posting about self-improvement. The positive possibility waiting here is grounded momentum, not adrenaline, not hype. Momentum that comes from alignment. When you act from alignment, the body often relaxes rather than tightens. The step feels clean, not performative, not forced. This is the pattern of the day, shifting from mental rehearsal to embodied initiation. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. This pattern is surfacing now because of the exact architecture of the sky. The new moon is at 28 degrees Aquarius, the final degree of the sign. In astrology, the last degree carries a sense of culmination. It gathers everything that has been learned in that sign and concentrates it. With the sun and moon there together, your mental narratives are being distilled. The stories you've been telling yourself about your future, your role, your identity and community are reaching a point of clarity. Mars and Pluto in Aquarius intensify this. Mars pushes, Pluto deepens. Together, they've likely amplified your awareness of where you feel empowered and where you feel constrained. They don't let you ignore misalignment for long. Even if you try to stay neutral, something inside you has been pressing for truth. At the same time, Mercury and the North Node in Pisces shift the tone from analysis to embodiment. Pisces dissolves rigid thinking, it blurs sharp edges. It asks you to trust what feels peaceful rather than what sounds impressive. This is why the pattern isn't explosive, it's dissolving. A quiet softening of mental contracts that no longer fit. Saturn at 0 degrees Aries is equally important. 0 degrees marks a beginning. Aries marks initiation. Saturn marks responsibility. This combination doesn't push you into dramatic action. It asks for maturity around your impulses. If something wants to begin, it must begin with structure, not spectacle. Chiron in Aries adds emotional sensitivity to this process. The hesitation you feel isn't random. It may be tied to earlier experiences where asserting yourself felt unsafe or unsupported. The sky doesn't erase that memory. It simply creates a context where you can move with awareness rather than react from it. Uranus in Taurus continues to recalibrate your sense of stability. What once felt secure may now feel limiting. Fortune in Capricorn reminds you that tangible effort still matters. This is not about abandoning the material world for an abstract vision. It's about building differently. So the pattern of thinking about change but hesitating to act is not a flaw. It's the natural result of air energy completing its cycle while fire energy is just beginning. The mind has finished its review. The body is preparing to move. This is why the invitation is gentle. You are standing at the seam between ideas and action, between collective expectation and personal alignment. The sky is not demanding a leap. It is inviting a conscious step, informed by everything you've just completed. There's an older spiritual storyline that might interpret this moment as a dramatic turning point, a destiny checkpoint, a cosmic declaration that everything must change now. But that framing doesn't actually match this sky. There is no eclipse, no extreme aspect forcing a collapse, no external event demanding a rupture. What we have instead is a completion in the realm of thought and the quiet beginning of personal responsibility. It's subtle, and because it's subtle, it's easy to miss. The old narrative says that when something shifts, it must be obvious. There must be a visible ending, a confrontation, a bold declaration. You must cut ties, make announcements, rebrand your identity. But Aquarius, at the final degree, doesn't require spectacle. It requires honesty. It asks you to admit where you've been performing for approval or holding on to a role because it once felt safe. Saturn in Aries doesn't require grand rebellion either. It asks for maturity in how you initiate, a calm decision to act without needing applause, a willingness to take ownership of your direction without dramatizing it. The reframe here is important. You are not behind, you are not late, and you are not failing just because you haven't made a dramatic move. Sometimes restraint is not fear, it's incubation. The tension you've felt is not a sign that something is wrong, it's a sign that your internal framework has been recalibrating. Mars and Pluto in Aquarius have been clearing mental clutter. Mercury and the North Node in Pisces are softening rigid definitions. Saturn in Aries is building a new foundation for action. This is not a verdict on your past. It's not a punishment for hesitating. It's a maturation of your agency. Instead of asking, "What do I need to cut?" you might ask, "What do I need to begin quietly?" Instead of assuming something dramatic must end, you can recognize that something subtle is aligning. The shift is not about becoming someone entirely new. It's about acting from a more integrated version of who you already are. And that kind of shift rarely needs an audience. Integration today is not about doing more, it's about moving differently. The sky is asking for subtle alignment, not dramatic correction. With the new moon completing Aquarius and Saturn beginning its cycle in Aries, the invitation is to let thought and action reconnect in a grounded way. So instead of making a list of 10 improvements, choose one small area where you've been overthinking, just one. Notice where you've been mentally rehearsing a change without touching it. Maybe it's a boundary you've wanted to set. Maybe it's a creative project you keep refining in your head. Maybe it's a health habit you've been researching but not starting. The integration here is simple. Reduce the gap between idea and action by one step. Not 5 steps, not a leap. 1. Because Mercury and the North Node are in Pisces, this step should feel emotionally honest, not strategically impressive. Ask yourself, does this feel peaceful in my body? Does it create a subtle sense of relief? If the answer is yes, begin there. You don't need to explain your shift to anyone. Venus in Aries supports directness, but it doesn't require exposure. You can communicate clearly without revealing everything that's evolving inside you. A short, clean response. A calm no. A quiet yes. As the day moves forward, let your pace reflect the new posture. If you feel the urge to overcommit, pause. If you feel the pull to announce something prematurely, wait. Saturn in Aries favors consistency over impulse. Ground yourself in something tangible. Fortune in Capricorn supports practical stabilization. Organize one small area of your life. Update one document. Close one open loop. Physical order can help your nervous system integrate the mental shift. And if you notice old doubts surfacing, especially around asserting yourself, acknowledge them without letting them drive. Chiron in Aries suggests that healing happens through action taken gently, not perfectly. Integration today is not about proving that you've changed. It's about behaving in alignment with who you're becoming, even when no one is watching. Let the step be small. Let it be quiet. Let it be real. As the day closes, the energy becomes quieter. Less about analyzing where you stand, less about preparing what you'll say, more about noticing how you feel after you've chosen differently. By evening, you may realize that nothing dramatic has happened. No big confrontation, no visible turning point. The world looks the same. Your responsibilities are still there. Your inbox still exists. Your relationships haven't suddenly transformed. And yet, something has shifted. Not outside, inside. And that is where real cycles begin. The new moon at the final degree of Aquarius has reset your mental posture. Saturn at the beginning of Aries has introduced a new tone of personal responsibility. Mercury and the North Node in Pisces have softened your grip on outcomes. You may feel slightly more grounded in your own center, slightly less reactive to group dynamics, slightly more aware of when you're about to overexpose a plan before it's ready. That is enough. This Pisces new moon threshold is not asking you to prove your growth. It's inviting you to practice it quietly, to begin gently, to let alignment precede visibility. As you move into the next few days, you don't need to rush clarity. Let the integration continue at a human pace. Notice where your body relaxes when you act in alignment. Notice where tension returns when you drift back into performance. Tonight you might sit for a few minutes without input. No scrolling, no strategizing, just a simple check-in. What feels lighter than it did last week? What feels ready to begin, even if no one else knows yet? You don't need a verdict. You don't need a dramatic sign. The shift has already begun in how you carry yourself, and from that subtle shift, you can build.